In a gentle way, you can shake the world. We welcome you to Human Rights Day 2016. My name is Julie Passamonte, and I'm a member of the Student Awareness League. Spokane Community College, along with our friends Phi Theta Kappa in the International Club, we are pleased that you are joining us today. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce to you the president of Spokane Community College, Dr. Ryan Karstens, who will share a little bit about our honored guest. Thank you, Dr. Karstens, for your support.
Good morning, everybody. Students, faculty, staff, and I think we have some guests from the community. We welcome all of you here today. I was invited to come up and introduce our speaker. This is a great privilege and honor to do so. Gandhi is one of the few names in history that evoke such powerful images of integrity, courage, social harmony, and above all, hope. Arun Gandhi carries within himself the same guiding principles as his grandfather, and you may have heard of his grandfather. He was a peacemaker and spiritual leader, Mohandas K. Gandhi, also known as Mahatma Gandhi. What I did not know about some of Arun Gandhi's background was that he spent a number of months with his grandfather. So I have a question for you. How many of you have been able to have vacations with your grandparents? Many of you. When I was a child, we used to travel to my grandparents' place, and we would go see them for a week or two in summer and sometimes at Christmas. What's so unique here for me, reading about Arun's life, is he had an 18-month stay with his grandfather, which I never have gotten to do. That was what a privilege that was. An 18-month stay where his grandfather would give him the keys to the powerful philosophy of nonviolence, and which helped shape the foundation of Arun Gandhi's life's work. Now, when he was doing this visit, this was a dangerous, exciting time because Mahatma Gandhi was leading the people of India in their revolutionary and nonviolent struggle for independence from British rule. Arun grew up in apartheid South Africa. And because of his Indian heritage, he actually suffered racial discrimination, violence, bullying from both the blacks and the whites because he did not fit in with either one of them. As a young boy, he could be persecuted or beaten by the black youth because he wasn't black, and also by the white youth for the same reason. And this is an interesting story too. At one point in his life, he was filled with rage and plotting to avenge what was happening to him. And he subscribed to the Charles Atlas bodybuilding magazine so that he could have the strength to fight back. You know, that does make sense, right? But when his parents discovered the reason for their 12-year-old son's sudden fascination with exercise, they decided that a visit to his grandfather in India was in order, and thus began his 18-month stay. Well, as an adult, Mr. Gandhi came to the United States in 1987, so what is that, almost 30 years ago. And he completed research on racism in America. This resulted in his wife, Sunanda, and he organizing in 1991 the M.K. Gandhi Institute for Nonviolence, which is now headquartered at the University of Rochester in New York. The mission of this institute was to foster understanding of nonviolence and then how to place or put that understanding or that philosophy into practice. 16 years later, in 2007, he started another institute, the Gandhi Worldwide Education Institute, and their focus is educational and training centers. So they build those for children who live in poverty and suffer from the injustices in society. In 2013, Arun was invited also to be on the board of Legacy of Hope, which is Nelson Mandela's children's hospitals in Africa. We are very honored and privileged to have Arun Gandhi here with us today. We are one of hundreds of opportunities that he has had to speak to governmental, social, or educational audiences, many colleges and universities many corporate and civic organizations. He is a worldwide speaker. He has this wonderful personal experience that lends him an element of expertise and wisdom that he can share with us from his cross-cultural experiences as well as the experiences of his family. And he brings that firsthand insight with us from spending time with one of the world's most influential leaders, his grandfather. So I'd like you to give a warm Spokane welcome to our honored guest speaker today, Arun Gandhi.
Thank you and good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here today, especially because you're all celebrating the Human Rights Day. And I would like to caution you that human rights should not be celebrated just on one day. It's part of our life, and we should be conscious of human rights throughout every day of our life there. But we also need to remember that rights go along with responsibilities. We cannot enjoy human rights if we are not willing to shoulder the responsibilities. And so it's equally important to think about what are our responsibilities as citizens of a country and the world, and what do we need to do to make this world a better place for everybody to live in. And that would be creating peace in the world. But the reason why human rights have been eroding over the years is because we have been so dominated by a culture of violence. A culture of violence that has taken over every aspect of our life. Our language has become violent, our relationships are violent, our sports is violent, our entertainment is violent, everything about us has become violent. And it's that culture of violence that destroys rights and all the other fabrics of democracy that we cherish so much. And this is what my grandfather was very concerned about. You know, he started his nonviolent practice. It really happened by accident. He wasn't planning this, but he was in South Africa to represent an Indian merchant in a legal problem that he had. And it was during that time that he suffered prejudice and became a victim of prejudice. And he wanted to get justice. But he rejected the violent way of getting justice. And he began to think of different ways that we can adopt, and he came up with the idea of nonviolence. And when he started practicing nonviolence in South Africa, it was specifically for a situation. So he used it as a tool for that particular situation. But as he practiced it over and over again in South Africa and then in India, he realized that nonviolence is not a tool. It's not something that we can use when it's convenient and discard when it is not. It has to become a way of life. We have to become the change that we wish to see in the world. If we don't adopt nonviolence as a way of life and make it a part of ourselves, we will never be able to create a peaceful society. And that's where he realized that we must become the change that we wish to see in the world. And we have to dismantle that culture of violence that dominates us and replace it with a culture of nonviolence. So today when scholars talk about nonviolence as a strategy, I object to it because it's not a strategy. It is a way of life. The as I said earlier, he came upon this quite by accident. And it really happened when they were married. My grandfather and grandmother were married at the age of 13. And they started living together at the age of 16. And at that age, he said he didn't know who was going to be the boss in the relationship. And so he started going to the library and reading books on the subject, and all these books were obviously written by male chauvinists, and they all talked about how the husband should lay down the rules and enforce them strictly. So he came home one evening after reading this book, and he told grandmother, he said, "From tomorrow you are not going to step out of the house without my permission. That is the law, and you're going to observe it, and I want no arguments about it." And grandmother didn't say anything at all. She didn't react, she didn't say anything. She just turned around and went to bed. Got up the next day, and she continued to do what she always did. Went out and visited and never bothered to get his permission. So a few days later, when grandfather realized that she was not obeying him, he confronted her again, and he says, "How dare you disobey me?" And that's when, very quietly, without raising her voice or getting agitated, very quietly, grandmother says to him that, "I was brought up to believe that we must always obey the elders in the house. And I believe the elders in this house are your parents. But if you are trying to tell me that I should not obey your mother, but obey you instead, let me know so that I can go and tell your mother I'm not going to obey you anymore." And of course, grandfather couldn't tell her to do that. And so the whole matter was settled. And grandfather acknowledges that that was the most profound lesson in nonviolent conflict resolution that he learned there. And from that point onwards, understanding anger and being able to use that energy constructively became a part of his philosophy of nonviolence. He believed very sincerely that if we don't learn about our anger, if we don't understand it, and if we are not capable of channeling that energy constructively and intelligently, we will never be able to create peace in the world. And so that became the foundation of his philosophy of nonviolence. And that was the first lesson that he taught me when I came to him, as you were told in the introduction, after a lot of hate and prejudice that I suffered in South Africa in the first 10 years of my life. I was very angry and I wanted to fight back again, and that's when grandfather told me that anger is like electricity. It's just as useful and just as powerful, but only if we use it intelligently. But it can be just as deadly and destructive if we abuse it. So just as we channel electrical energy and bring it into our lives and use it for the good of humanity, we must learn to channel anger in the same way so that we can use that energy for the good of humanity rather than abuse it and cause death and destruction. He suggested that I write an anger journal. He said, every time you get angry about something, don't act on it, don't say anything or do anything that you're going to regret later on. But put it all down in your journal. But write the journal with the intention of finding a solution to the problem, and then commit yourself to finding a solution. Now that is very important, because a lot of people today tell me that they've been writing an anger journal for a long time, but it hasn't really helped them, because every time they go back and read the journal, they're just reminded of the incident and they get angry all over again. Because we are told to pour our anger out into the journal and get it out of our system. That doesn't help. So it's important that we write the journal with the intention of finding a solution and then commit ourselves to finding that solution. After learning this profound lesson, I was 11, 12 years old then, and I wanted to test grandfather and see whether he himself had learned the lesson or not. And this was the time in his life when he was involved with many important things, like emancipation of the Indian women, the education of Indian children, and emancipation of the so-called untouchable people. So he had programs going on in all these different fields. And these programs needed funding, and he realized that the easiest way for him to raise the money he needed was to sell his autograph. And so he put a fee of 5 rupees, which in today's currency would approximately be about $5, for each autograph. And every morning and evening, when thousands of people assembled for his interfaith prayer services, which were held in the open on a good day or in an auditorium like this on a bad day. But every morning and evening, many of them would seek his autograph. And many of them did it over and over again because they just wanted to support his work there. But while I was living with him, it was my duty to go out into the audience and collect the autograph books and the money and bring it to him for his signature. And one day I thought to myself, if everybody could get his autograph, why not me? After all, I am his grandson and I deserve an autograph too. But I didn't have any money, so I got myself a little autograph book and I slipped it into the pile, hoping that he wouldn't notice the absence of money there. But when he came to that book, he said, "Why is there no money for this autograph?" And I said, "Because it's my book." And he said, "Well, you should know that I don't make an exception even for grandsons. That if you want an autograph, you'll not only have to pay me for it, but you'll have to earn the money and pay me. Don't ask your parents for it." And I said, "No way." He said, "You're my grandfather and I'm going to make you give me this autograph free." So he laughed and said, "All right, let's see who wins." And from that day, every day, when he was in high-level political discussions with Indian politicians or British politicians, I would barge into the room with my autograph book and thrust it in his face and demand an autograph. My logic was that just to get rid of me, he would sign the book and give it to me. But instead, every time I became too boisterous, all he did was put his hands across my mouth, press my head against his chest, and went on talking politics. On many occasions, the other politicians used to get exasperated and tell grandfather, "Why don't you give him the autograph and be done with it? He disturbs our meetings every day." And he just laughed and said, "This is a private joke between the two of us. You don't have to get involved in it." But the long and short of it is that he never did give me the autograph. But he never, ever told me to get out of the room and leave him alone. As we would do with our siblings or our children, if they came into the room when we are working on something important, we sometimes tell them very rudely to get out of the room and leave them alone. He never did that to me. And that's when I realized that if he was able to control his anger to that extent, if we attempt to achieve 50% of it, we will make a big difference in the level of violence that we experience today. So it's very important for us to understand our anger and learn ways in which we can use it intelligently and constructively. But also it's important for us, as I said earlier, to understand the breadth and the depth of the philosophy of nonviolence. It's not that because we are not at war, we are in peace, or that because we are not fighting with other people, that we are nonviolent people. Nonviolence is much deeper than that. And I realized this one day when he made me go out and look for a little pencil that I tossed away, a little 3-inch butt of a pencil. And he said I had to go out and look for it. And I said, you must be joking. I said, this is already getting dark outside. And he gave me a flashlight and said, yeah, take the flashlight and go out and look for the pencil. And I must have spent about 2 hours searching for it. And when I finally found the pencil and brought it to him, he said, now I want you to sit here and learn 2 very important lessons. The first lesson is that even in the making of a simple thing like a pencil, we use a lot of the world's natural resources. And when we throw them away, we are throwing away the world's natural resources, and that is violence against nature. And the second lesson is that because in an affluent society we can afford to buy all these things in bulk, we overconsume the resources of the world. And because we overconsume them, we are depriving people elsewhere of these resources, and they have to live in poverty. And that is violence against humanity. And that was the first time I realized that all of these things that we do every day, consciously and unconsciously, things that we overconsume or throw away and destroy because we have so much of it, that every time we indulge in any of those actions, we are indulging in violence. To make me understand this lesson thoroughly, he made me draw a genealogical tree of violence, just as we would do a family tree with grandparent at the top and the rest of the children at the level, and so on. A tree grows. Well, he made me draw this tree of violence with violence as the grandparent, and physical violence and passive violence as the 2 branches. And every day before I went to bed, I had to analyze and examine everything that I had experienced during the day. Things that I may have read, or things that people may have done to me, or I may have done to people. Whatever it was, all of that had to be examined and analyzed and put in their appropriate places on that tree. If it was the kind of violence where physical force is used, that would go under physical violence, and that would be things like fighting and kicking and beating and murders and rapes and wars and all of these things where physical force is used. That is physical violence. But passive violence is something that we ignore because sometimes we don't even know of it as being violent. And it's all the things like discrimination, oppression, suppression, economic, political, social, cultural, religious, all the waste and resources that we overconsume and destroy. All of that would go under passive violence. And the way I had to determine this was to ask myself, if somebody were to do this to me, would I be helped by it or would I be hurt by it? And if I came to the conclusion that it would hurt me, then that would be passive violence. And when I began to do this introspection, it was a form of introspection, finding out my own weaknesses. When I began to do this, I was amazed that within a few months I was able to fill up a whole wall in my room with acts of passive violence. The physical violence didn't grow very much, but the passive violence grew endlessly. And that's when I came to know how much passive violence all of us commit every day, knowingly and unknowingly. And it is that passive violence that generates anger in the victim, and the victim then resorts to physical violence to get justice. So it is passive violence that fuels the fire of physical violence. So logically, if we want to put out that fire of physical violence, we have to cut off the fuel supply. And since the fuel supply comes from each one of us, we have to become the change that we wish to see in the world. It's very important for us to understand this. It's important for us to do that introspection and see how we contribute to violence every day. And how can we change ourselves so that we don't do that anymore. And it's only then that we will be able to make a difference in this world. We cannot be content with the fact that a majority of the people in the world are enjoying a good life. That means 51% of the world is enjoying a good life and all the material benefits, and 49% of the world is languishing in extreme poverty. And we cannot be happy with that situation. We have to ensure that everybody in the world gets a good life and has the ability to enjoy the fruits of hard labor. And we have to make that effort to see that everybody gets that. We have to have that kind of a world vision. I think one of the things that the worst part of democracy is the concept of nationalism and patriotism. That when we think that we can preserve our part of the world and not be concerned about the rest of the world, we are making a very big mistake. Because no country, however rich or however powerful it may be, can preserve its stability and sanctity on its own. The stability and security of any nation depends on the stability and security of the whole world. And it's only when we ensure that everybody in the world gets the opportunity to live a good life that we will have stability and security. Until then, we are going to be tormented by more and more violence and more terrorism, and our life is just going to be eroded, and democracy and all of these things will be meaningless because we'll be living in fear all the time. So we have to understand these things. We have to practice this thing. We have to make sure that we transform ourselves. Each one of us needs to do that introspection to find out their weaknesses and transform those weaknesses. This is the type of education that you're not going to get in any college or any school. It's a type of education that you have to work on yourself, because you have to be committed to becoming better human beings. We don't become better human beings by getting a college degree. We become better human beings only when we make that effort to be better human beings. What my grandfather and Dr. Martin Luther King and all the other great people whom we worship today, what they did was they made sure that they became better people and more committed people by working on themselves. They were not born great, but they worked on themselves and became great. And so we can all do the same things and become better citizens and better human beings and make this world a better place for future generations. Otherwise, we are just going to languish and destroy ourselves with this consumption of violence. So I want to conclude now with one final story that my grandfather used to be very fond of telling us. The story of an ancient Indian king who once became very curious about the meaning of peace. And he invited all the intellectuals in his kingdom to come and explain the meaning of peace. And everybody came there and did their best, but nobody could satisfy the king. And one day the intellectual from another town came on a visit, and the king asked him to explain the meaning of peace. And he said, the only person who can give you a satisfactory answer is an old sage who lives outside your kingdom. But he is so old that he cannot come to you. You will have to go to him and ask him this question. So the next day the king went to the sage and asked him the meaning of peace. And the sage quietly went to the back of the house and came back with a grain of wheat and placed that grain of wheat on the king's palm and said, "Here is the meaning of peace." And of course, the king didn't know what a grain of wheat had to do with peace, and he didn't want to show his ignorance. So he quietly clutched that grain of wheat and went back to his palace, and he found a little gold box, and he placed that grain of wheat in the box. And every morning he would open the box to look for an answer, and he couldn't find any answers. So a few days later, when this intellectual came back on a return visit, the king asked him to explain, and he said, "It's very simple." He said, "As long as you keep this grain of wheat in this box, nothing is going to happen. It will eventually rot and perish, and that will be the end of the story. But if you had allowed this grain of wheat to interact with all the elements, if you had planted this outside in the soil, it would sprout and grow, and very soon you could have a whole field of wheat." And that is the meaning of peace. That if somebody has found peace and if they keep it locked up in their hearts, it would perish with them. But if they let it interact, it would grow, sprout and grow, and very soon we could have a whole world of peacemakers. So I have come here this morning to give you the grain of wheat that I got from my grandfather. And I hope that you won't let it rot and perish, but let it interact so that all of us together can make this world a better place for future generations. Thank you. I'll be glad to answer some questions if anybody has.
When you brought your grandfather the little pencil, why didn't you ask him for his autograph then?
I didn't have the wisdom at that time, I guess.
Thank you for being here today. I was curious, did your grandfather have mentors, people that he looked to for guidance?
My grandfather found guidance from many people, from everyday people he met. They inspired him in some way or the other. But the main people I think who really inspired him were Thoreau and the Russian author, War and Peace. Sorry, what was that name? But he was also inspired by the scriptures. He read all the scriptures. He read the Quran, the Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Hindu scriptures. You know, one of the things that he always emphasized is a friendly study. And he emphasized the word friendly. A friendly study of all the scriptures is the sacred duty of every individual. And he made that friendly study, and he found that none of the scriptures really had the whole truth, that every one of them had just a little bit of the truth. And they hung on to that truth thinking that that was the whole truth. He used to explain this to us in terms of the 6 visually challenged people who had never seen an elephant, who were asked to describe an elephant by feeling the elephant. So each one of them was placed at a different part, and each one of them was feeling a different part of the elephant. So the one who was feeling the legs of the elephant said, "This feels like a huge pole." The one who was feeling the body of the elephant said, "This feels like a huge wall." The one who held the trunk of the elephant said, "This feels like a huge snake." So each one of them had a different perspective of the elephant. None of them were right, nor were they wrong. But they just didn't have the complete perspective there. And that's what my grandfather said religion today is. That every religion has a little bit of the truth. They are not wrong, but they are not absolutely right either. And the only way we can understand what religion means and what spirituality means is if all of them come together and discuss this and share their experiences. He didn't believe in the melting pot. He didn't believe that we give up our religion and become, create a new religion. He said we have to live within our religion, but we have to work to enhance the understanding of religion. And that can be done only if we have an interaction between all the religions. So these were things that he learned and they inspired his thinking.
Sorry. Thank you for coming to Spokane today. I really appreciate it. Right now, it's perfect timing that you're here because our community is really hurting. We've had 3 police-involved shootings in the last 5 days, and the community is scared, they're angry. There's a lot of fear out there right now. And so I wish you could live in Spokane with this. I know you can't, you have to move on. I would love for you to talk to our community. But what advice can you give us to hold strong and keep the love going and the compassion as opposed to being angry? Because right now, I would say in the 45 years I've lived here, this is probably one of the scariest times for our community.
Well, it's not just his community, it's everywhere, all over the United States. I live in Rochester, and we have just as much violence there in Rochester. And again, it goes back to our rights. Everybody wants the right to possess guns, but nobody has the responsibility of doing it, properly. I can't understand why we should have guns. Every household should have guns, and why guns are required to protect people. We have the police and we have the army, and they are entrusted with protecting the people, and we should not be having this kind of freedom where we are being very irresponsible. So, one thing leads to another, and it's just a lot of chaos.
Hello, thank you for speaking to us today. My question's not as serious. I want to know what kind of fun things you did with your grandfather, such as picking up rocks, riding horses, swimming, those kind of things. What were your favorite memories of things that you did together besides reading and just learning?
Oh, we did spinning. Grandfather was involved in many important things, so he didn't have a time to go out horse riding or anything. But spinning, spinning cotton and making cotton cloth was something that was very important to him, and every moment that he had, he would spin. It was also very meditative and very calming. The whole action of spinning wheel, I don't know if you have experienced it or seen it, but it's very meditative and calming, I think. So whenever we were together, we used to spin, and we used to have a competition. He taught me how to spin, and then I beat him. Yeah. And we used to have this competition every day to see who spun the thinnest and the most yarn in 1 hour. And finally, he acknowledged and wrote to my parents and said that Arun has consistently beaten me in spinning.
I was wondering if you could elaborate on your analogy of how we're meant to be the chains that exist in the world. Is that an analogy for how we should suppress violence, or?
No, not suppress violence. We should find the root of violence and try to eliminate that root. I'm not talking about suppressing it, but like if there is a lot of discrimination in our society, or if there's poverty and imbalance in society, we shouldn't be content to say that, well, it doesn't affect me, I'm happy, I'm enjoying a good life, and somebody else can take care of it. It's our responsibility. We all need to do something to make that change. And so all of us have to take that responsibility to see that we are conscious of what is happening in the world and are willing to make the sacrifices to change it.
I wanted to, first of all, thank you for honoring us by your presence here at Spokane Community College. I'm one of the teachers here. I saw the movie about your grandfather years and years ago, and I'm not suggesting that all of it was totally accurate, but I was so amazed by his ability nonviolently to have Great Britain leave India. There was a scene in the movie where he turned to one of the British people that he'd worked with in the military, and they were on opposing sides, and he said to him, at least the movie said this, I hope this difference does not come between us as men. And I'm wondering if you could comment about, in your own life and the life of your family, the lesson from your grandfather about how do you restore relationship when there has been conflict and there has been anger. Is there a system you use in your family? Do you sit down together and talk? Or how does that work itself out for you when anger does appear and it presents itself?
Well, yes, of course, it all depends on how serious the thing is, and when necessary, we certainly sit down and talk it as a family and get each other's perspectives on it. But in times, you're required to take immediate action, and you resort to it. I remember once in 1968, I was born and brought up in South Africa, and I lived there for 22 years. And I moved to India in 1956 after my father died. Now, I had not gone there with the intention of living there. I had gone there to immerse his ashes and come back and be with my mother and my sisters. But as fate would have it, I had a severe attack of appendicitis and had to undergo a surgery. And I fell in love with my nurse and decided to marry her. And the South African government wouldn't allow me to bring her back with me to South Africa. They said I could come alone, but not with her. And so I chose to live with my wife, and we set up home in India. In 1968, a friend of mine, an Indian friend from South Africa, wrote to me that he was coming to India for the first time, and he was very nervous about traveling abroad. And so he asked me if I would take care of him and make arrangements of his stay and all that. And because he was a good friend, I agreed to do it. And his ship arrived in Mumbai at 10 o'clock in the night, and I was the first Indian to go on board. And before I could meet my friend, I met a strange white man. And he just came up to me and grabbed my hands and introduced himself as Mr. Jackie Besson, a member of parliament from South Africa. The moment he introduced himself, I realized who he was. He was a confirmed racist. He supported apartheid. He was a member of parliament, and he was responsible in my eyes for all the prejudice and the violence that I had suffered because of hate. And so I realized that what he wanted was somebody local to take him and his wife around and show them the city. And my first reaction was to tell him to go and jump in the ocean. I wanted to insult him just as I was being insulted in South Africa. And I immediately stopped myself, and I said, if I do that, my parents and grandparents would never forgive me, because that is not what they taught me. And so I responded with friendship, and I shook hands with him, and I told him that I was a victim of apartheid, but I was not going to hold it against him. And he was a guest here, and I was going to do the best I can to make him comfortable and enjoy his stay. So the next 4 days when the ship was in town, my wife and I came every morning and picked them up and took them around and did all the touristy things and shopping and all that. And during that period, we would talk as friends about apartheid. I would question him and he would try to justify it. And every time the discussion got a little uneasy, we just changed the subject and talked about other things. And I didn't realize that at the end of the 4 days, when we finally went there to say goodbye to them, both of them embraced us and wept tears of remorse. And they said that in these 4 days, you opened our eyes to the evils of apartheid. And we are promising you that when we go back, we are going to fight apartheid and destroy it. And I was still a skeptic. I wasn't willing to accept this. And I told my wife, I said, let's wait and see if he really means it, because these people have a habit of coming out of the country and saying one thing and going back and resuming their old ways. But we followed his political career for the next 6 or 7 years, and we must say that the man had changed. He spoke against apartheid so vehemently that he lost his elections, he was thrown out of his party, but he didn't stop speaking against apartheid. And so I was, always very moved by that experience. Because I think about it and I say, if I had insulted him the way I initially wanted to, I wouldn't have gained anything. He would have gone back as a confirmed racist and he would have said, these Indians deserve what they get. But by being friendly to him for 4 days, he was a transformed person. And that is the power of nonviolence.
Thank you, Mr. Gandhi, for
Thank
your
you.
inspiration. Thank you, everybody, for coming out.